October 14th, 1943, 23,000 feet above Schweinfurt, Germany. Lieutenant Colonel Bernley Jr. peers through the plexiglass nose of his B-17 Flying Fortress. 321 bombers stretch across the sky in tight formation. Their mission: destroy the ball-bearing factories that keep Germany's war machine running, but they're 700 miles from England, and their fighter escorts have just turned back. What happens next becomes known as Black Thursday, the bloodiest day in the history of American air warfare. German fighters swarm from every direction. Me-109s and FW-190s tear through the bomber formations like wolves through a flock of sheep. The radio fills with desperate voices. Bandit at 6 o'clock. We're hit. Bailing out. By the time the survivors limp home, 60 B-17s lie scattered across Germany, 600 airmen dead or captured. Another 17 bombers crash on landing, their hydraulics shot to pieces. The losses are catastrophic, unsustainable. At this rate, the entire 8th Air Force will be wiped out in weeks. The problem is brutally simple. American fighters can't go the distance. The P-47 Thunderbolt, 7 tons of radial engine and armor plate, has the firepower to fight. But its Pratt Whitney R-2800 guzzles fuel. At operational altitude, it burns through its tanks in just over 2 hours. That gives pilots barely enough range to escort bombers to the German border before turning back. Every commander knows what's needed: more power, more speed, more altitude performance. But the R-2800 is already pushed to its limits. Higher boost pressure means engine-destroying detonation. Advancing the spark timing risks blowing cylinder heads clean off. The experts are unanimous. You can't squeeze more power from an engine without tearing it apart. Deep in the test cells at Pratt & Whitney's East Hartford facility, a 32-year-old engineer named Frank Walker stares at a destroyed R-2800. The cylinder walls are scored. The piston crowns look like melted cheese. Another engine sacrificed trying to coax out extra horsepower. Walker runs his hand over the wreckage. His colleagues are brilliant men, PhDs in thermodynamics, legends of engine design, but they're all approaching the problem the same way: better fuel, exotic alloys, tighter tolerances. What Walker doesn't know, what none of them know, is that the solution won't come from making the engine stronger. It will come from making it cooler. In 1943, the crisis over Europe isn't just about courage. It's about physics. The Pratt & Whitney R-2800 Double Wasp is already a masterpiece. 18 cylinders arranged in 2 rows, producing 2,000 horsepower. It powers the P-47 Thunderbolt, the F-4U Corsair, the F-6F Hellcat. American pilots call these planes their flying tanks, planes that can absorb punishment and bring their crews home. But the R-2800 has a problem that no amount of engineering elegance can solve: thermodynamics. When you compress air and fuel into a cylinder, temperatures soar. Add boost pressure from the turbocharger, and you're playing with fire, literally. Above a certain threshold, the fuel-air mixture detonates prematurely, hammering the pistons with explosive force. Engineers call it knock. Pilots call it the death rattle. Either way, it tears engines apart in minutes. The obvious solutions have all been tried. High-octane fuel, already using 100 octane, pushed to 130 octane for critical missions. Can't go higher without complete engine redesign. Water-cooled engines? The Merlin-powered P-51 Mustang shows promise, but switching engine types takes years. Bombers are dying now. Reduce boost pressure? Sure, the engine survives longer. It's also slower, weaker, and can't reach the altitudes where German fighters lurk. The military's requirements are contradictory: more power, no redesign, immediate deployment. In March 1943, General Hap Arnold visits the Pratt & Whitney facility. His message is blunt. We're losing the air war. Every escort mission beyond 200 miles becomes a slaughter. I need fighters that can go deep into Germany. Not next year, not next month. Now. The room erupts with objections. The laws of physics don't change on military schedules, one chief engineer says. You want 30% more power from the same engine? That's fantasy. Another adds, we're already extracting every possible horsepower. Any more boost, and you're just building very expensive paperweights. The problem isn't just technical, it's mathematical. Horsepower equals torque times RPM. The RPM is limited by propeller tip speed. The torque is limited by fuel octane and combustion temperature. Every variable is maxed out. But Frank Walker isn't in that meeting. He's in the back of the experimental shop, mixing something that looks like a bartender's mistake. Walker didn't arrive at Pratt Whitney with an impressive pedigree. No PhD from MIT, no published papers in the Journal of Aerospace Engineering. He started as a test technician in 1935, running engines on dynamometers, logging temperatures, cleaning up after catastrophic failures. While the educated engineers designed in offices upstairs, Walker lived on the test floor. He knew the R2800 intimately, not from blueprints, but from countless hours listening to its rhythm, watching its gauges, feeling its vibrations through the concrete. His colleagues respected his work ethic, but considered him, charitably, adequate, a technician who knew his place. What they didn't see was Walker's habit of reading old research papers during lunch breaks, academic journals from the 1920s and 30s gathering dust in the company library. Most engineers considered that stuff ancient history, primitive attempts at problems they'd since solved with superior methods. One paper caught Walker's attention, a 1932 study by British engineer Harry Ricardo on knock suppression. Ricardo had experimented with spraying water into engine cylinders. The results showed remarkable anti-detonation effects, but the research was shelved. Too messy, too complicated, too many unknowns. Everyone had moved on. Everyone except Frank Walker. March 1943, the experimental test cell at Pratt Whitney. Frank Walker isn't supposed to be here after hours, but the night shift security guard knows him, the guy who's always tinkering, always just checking one more thing. On the workbench sits a mason jar filled with clear liquid. Not gasoline, not oil, water, plain tap water. Next to it, a bottle of methyl alcohol, the stuff they use to prevent fuel line freezing. Walker mixes them in a 50-50 ratio, a cocktail, half water, half methanol. The idea had come to him 3 nights ago, reading Ricardo's old paper for the 4th time. Ricardo had tried water injection, but struggled with 2 problems. Water alone didn't prevent detonation completely, and it froze at altitude. But what if you mixed water with methanol? The water provides evaporative cooling. As it vaporizes in the hot cylinder, it absorbs massive amounts of heat. The methanol acts as antifreeze and adds octane. Together, they might suppress detonation while dramatically lowering combustion temperature. It's elegant, it's simple, it's also completely unauthorized. Walker sets up a basic injection system on a test engine. Nothing fancy, just a hand pump, some copper tubing, and a nozzle jury-rigged into the supercharger intake. He starts the R2800, runs it up to normal operating parameters, then advances the throttle into the range where detonation usually begins. The engine smooths out. Temperature gauges drop. He advances further, past the red lines, into boost pressures that should be tearing the engine apart. The R2800 keeps running. Not just running, singing. The extra boost is translating directly into horsepower. No knock, no warning signs. Walker's hands are shaking as he records the numbers. 2,600 horsepower. That's 30% above rated power. from an engine that's supposed to be at its physical limits. He runs the test for 15 minutes, varying the boost, watching for any sign of trouble. Nothing. The engine is cooler under extreme boost than it normally runs at standard power. At 2 a.m., he finally shuts down the engine and slumps against the test cell wall. This works. The math works. The physics works. He's also just violated about 17 company protocols, commandeered expensive test equipment without authorization, and modified a military engine without documentation. The smart play is to write this up properly, submit it through channels, wait for the review board. But Walker thinks about those bomber crews, the ones who won't make it home because their fighter escorts have to turn back. He thinks about Lieutenant Colonel Lay's report from Schweinfurt, which the company brass passed around. The sky was full of parachutes. Some of the boys were on fire. At 8 a.m., Frank Walker walks into the office of Luke Hobbs, Pratt Whitney's chief of engine development. He's carrying a mason jar filled with what looks like watered-down moonshine. "Sir," he says, "I think I can give you 600 extra horsepower, but you're going to think I'm crazy." Luke Hobbs stares at the mason jar like Walker just handed him a live grenade. "You want to inject water into my engines." "Water and methanol, yes, sir. 50-50 mixture. Sprayed into the supercharger. That's insane. I ran a test last night." "You ran an unauthorized test on a military engine?" Hobbs's face goes crimson. "Do you have any idea what happens if that engine was scheduled for qualification testing? If there's any unlogged modification?" Walker pulls out his notebook, hands shaking slightly. "Sir, I logged everything. The engine hit 2,600 horsepower. Cylinder head temperatures dropped 40 degrees. No detonation, no knock, no... That's impossible." Hobbs snatches the notebook, flipping through pages of temperature curves, boost pressure readings, power calculations. His expression shifts from anger to confusion to something Walker can't quite read. Hobbs looks up. "You're telling me you solved heat-induced detonation with tap water?" "The water cools the charge through evaporation. The methanol provides antifreeze and additional octane. Together, that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard." Hobbs tosses the notebook back. "Water in an engine. What's next? Orange juice in the oil pan." Walker takes a breath. "Sir, Harry Ricardo published research in 1932 showing Ricardo's work was theoretical speculation, completely impractical. Because he used water alone, the methanol makes it..." "Walker." Hobbs cuts him off. "I appreciate initiative, really. But we have PhDs working on the boost problem. Actual engineers with degrees. You're a test technician. A good one. But this?" He waves at the jar. "This is bartender science." The words hang in the air. Bartender science. Walker feels his face burning. "Yes, sir, I understand." He's at the door when Hobbs speaks again, quieter now. "That test you ran, the engine's still intact?" "Yes, sir, still on the dyno in cell 3. Long pause. Hobbs drums his fingers on the desk, staring at Walker's notebook. "Tomorrow morning, 0600. You, me, and that engine. Nobody else. We run your cocktail through a proper test protocol. If, and this is a big if, you actually generated those numbers, I need to see it with my own eyes." Walker's heart hammers. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet. If this doesn't work, if you damage that engine with some reckless stunt, you're not just fired. I'll personally ensure you never work in aviation again." Hobbs leans back. "But if it does work..." He shakes his head. "Water in an engine. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard." Walker leaves before Hobbs can change his mind. That night, he can't sleep. He runs the calculations again and again, checks his notes, second guesses every measurement. In 17 hours, he'll either prove that an educated hunch can overcome conventional wisdom, or he'll prove that a test technician without proper credentials had no business playing engineer. The mason jar sits on his kitchen table, catching the moonlight. 50-50, water and methanol, a bartender's cocktail for fighter planes. March 16th, 1943, 5:47 a.m. Frank Walker arrives at Test Cell 3 to find Luke Hobbs already there, along with two senior engineers Walker recognizes from company meetings. Dr. Leonard Benson, who holds 3 patents on supercharger design, and Arthur Schmidt, head of thermodynamics. This is not the private test Walker expected. Hobbs doesn't look at him. Gentlemen, Mr. Walker claims he achieved 2,600 horsepower from a stock R2800 using an unorthodox method. We're here to verify or refute those claims. Dr. Benson crosses his arms. Luke, I've seen Walker's notes. I appreciate creativity, but injecting water into a precision engine? He says water like it's a dirty word. That's not innovation. That's contamination. The theory is sound, Walker starts. The theory? Benson actually laughs. Son, I've spent 15 years studying combustion. You're proposing to spray liquid, into a cylinder where we're trying to create controlled explosion. That's not sound theory. That's asking for hydraulic lock and destroyed pistons. Schmidt joins in. Even if, and I mean if, water somehow cools the charge without quenching combustion, you're introducing new variables we don't understand. Corrosion, ice formation at altitude, inconsistent mixture ratios. I've addressed the antifreeze issue with methanol. You've created a chemical cocktail without any materials compatibility testing, Schmidt interrupts. Do you know what methanol does to rubber fuel lines over time? To gasket compounds? Actually, Walker stops. He doesn't know. He's been so focused on the combustion physics that he hasn't thought through the long-term material interactions. The room goes quiet. Walker sees it in their eyes, the confirmation that he's out of his depth. Hobbs finally speaks. Run the test. Luke, Benson protests. Run the test. Walker's hands are steadier than he expected as he connects the injection system. 20 minutes later, the R-2800 is running. He brings it up to military power, 2,000 horsepower. Everything normal. Then he opens the valve on his cocktail mixture and advances the throttle. The engine note changes, deepens. The dyno needle climbs, 2,200 horsepower, 2,400, 2,600. Temperature gauges that should be screaming red are sitting in the green. The boost pressure would normally trigger detonation that you can hear. Metallic hammering that sounds like someone's throwing wrenches into the cylinders. Silence. Just the clean, powerful roar of an engine doing the impossible. Walker glances at the observers. Benson's mouth is literally hanging open. Schmidt is checking the gauges like they're broken. Hobbs is writing furiously in a notebook. Walker holds it there. 2,600 horsepower for 10 minutes, an eternity in test cell time. Then he throttles back, shuts off the injection system, brings the engine down normally. The room stays silent for a full 30 seconds after shutdown. Finally, Dr. Benson speaks, his voice different now, quieter. I need to see the cylinder heads. I need to verify there's no damage. Already inspected them this morning, Walker says. Before you arrived, they're perfect. Schmidt is recalculating the power-to-weight ratio. If we can package this into a production system, 2,600 horsepower from the R-2800 means the P-47 suddenly has the climb rate and altitude performance of... He trails off, doing more math. This changes everything. Hobbs closes his notebook. Gentlemen, we have a problem. A good problem, but a problem. He looks at Walker. Frank, you've invented something that could win the war. You've also created something that violates every engine design principle we hold sacred. The room erupted, Walker would later recall in a 1987 interview. Benson wanted immediate production implementation. Schmidt wanted 6 months of materials testing. Another engineer who just arrived wanted to classify it as a company trade secret. Everyone was talking over everyone else. Hobbs silences them with a raised hand. I'm taking this to General Arnold. Today. The military decides how fast this moves. He turns to Walker. Son, I called your idea bartender science. I was wrong. But you better pray it works in combat, because we're about to inject your cocktail into every frontline fighter in Europe. 3 weeks later, the first P-47 D-10s, equipped with Walker's anti-detonation injection system, roll off the production line. The pilots call it war emergency power. The Germans are about to call it something else. June 12, 1944, 26,000 feet above Normandy. Captain Francis Gabby Gabreski of the 56th Fighter Group scans the sky from his P-47D. Below, the D-Day invasion is 6 days old. Above, somewhere in the high Cirrus, German fighters are positioning for an attack on the bomber stream. His wingman's voice crackles. Bandits, 11 o'clock high, coming down. Gabreski spots them. 4 FW-190s diving from 30,000 feet, the altitude advantage that's been killing American fighters for years. The old P-47 couldn't climb fast enough to intercept. By the time you reach combat altitude, the Germans had already shredded the bombers and dove away. Gabreski's hand moves to a small red lever mounted near the throttle. Stenciled in white. War emergency power. 5. Min-max. He flips it forward. The effect is instantaneous. A fine mist of water and methanol sprays into the supercharger. The cylinder temperatures, which had been climbing toward the red, suddenly drop. With the detonation threat neutralized, the engine management system automatically advances spark timing and increases boost pressure. The R-2800 explodes with power. Gabreski feels it in his spine as 7 tons of Thunderbolt suddenly accelerates like it's been kicked by a mule. The rate of climb indicator swings wildly, 3,200 feet per minute, 3,400, numbers the P-47 couldn't touch before Walker's system. The German pilots see the P-47s climbing to intercept. They're not worried. American fighters are fast in a dive, but climbing, that's where altitude wins. Except this time, the Thunderbolts keep coming, impossibly fast. Reaching attack altitude with energy to spare. Gabreski pulls lead on the trailing FW-190, 600 yards, 500. His thumb hovers over the trigger for his 850 caliber machine guns, 400 yards, he fires. The FW-190 comes apart in a spectacular fireball. The remaining German fighters scatter, suddenly on the defensive against aircraft that shouldn't be able to touch them up here. Gabreski levels off, throttles back, flips the WOR emergency power lever off. His fuel flow returns to normal. The engine temperatures stabilize. In 5 minutes of combat, he's used less than 10 gallons of Walker's water methanol cocktail, but he's just rewritten the air war. The combat reports start flooding back to Pratt Whitney in July 1944. Robert Johnson, 56 Fighter Group, 28 kills. The war emergency power saved my life today. Jerry had altitude on me, normally a death sentence. Hit the injection, and suddenly I'm climbing through his altitude, guns blazing. He never expected it. Nobody expects the jug to outclimb them. David Schilling, 56th Fighter Group. We're calling it paddle magic. 5 minutes of power that feels like somebody swapped your engine for a rocket. The Germans think we're flying completely different aircraft. The statistics tell the story Walker's cocktail is writing in the sky. Before ADI implementation, Oak 1943, P-47 loss rate of 1.2% per mission, kill ratio of 2.1.1 against German fighters. After ADI implementation, summer 1944, P-47 loss rate drops to 0.7% per mission. Kill ratio soars to 4.61. The reason is simple physics. Walker's injection system gives American fighters 30% more power exactly when they need it most in combat. That translates to faster climb rates, better acceleration, higher operational ceiling. But the real victory isn't measured in horsepower. It's measured in bomber crews who make it home. From December 1943 to March 1944, after long-range escorts with ADI-equipped fighters become standard, the bomber loss rate drops from 16% per mission to under 4%. The second Schweinfurt disaster, where 60 B-17s died in a single mission, becomes impossible to repeat. American fighters can now escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back. In German Luftwaffe pilot Hans Philipp's diary, captured after his death in October 1944, there's an entry from June. The American Thunderbolt has become a different aircraft, where before we owned the high altitude, now they climb to meet us with unexpected speed. Our altitude advantage, our primary tactic, has been neutralized. Another German pilot, Johann Hans Steinhoff, would write after the war. By mid-1944, engaging the P-47 in anything but a perfect bounce became suicide. They seemed to have unlimited power, climbing to attack when they should have been struggling to maintain altitude. We called them Die Wasservögel, the water birds, once we learned their secret. Frank Walker never sees combat. He stays in East Hartford, refining the ADI system, solving teething problems, working 18-hour days as production ramps up. But the letters reach him. Dozens, then hundreds, from pilots and bomber crews. One letter, postmarked September 1944, arrives from Second Lieutenant James B. Thompson, a B-17 pilot. Mr. Walker, I don't know if you'll read this, but I had to write. Today our fighter escort stayed with us all the way to Schweinfurt and back. Same target where they massacred us a year ago. This time, we didn't lose a single bomber. The P-47 pilots told us about the emergency power system that lets them go the distance. I looked up who invented it. Sir, I have a wife and a baby daughter I've never met. Because of your work, I'm going to meet her. Because of you, 180 men in our group are going home instead of into POW camps, or worse. I don't know how to thank someone for your life. But thank you. Walker tacks that letter to his office wall. Then another arrives, and another. By war's end, Pratt Whitney has produced over 125,000 engines with Walker's ADI system. The P-47 Thunderbolt flies over 546,000 combat sorties in Europe. The kill ratio and loss rates establish it as one of the most effective fighters of the war, all powered by a bartender's cocktail, 50-50 water and methanol. November 10th, 1945. Victory in Europe has been official for 6 months. The Army Air Force throws a ceremony at Wright Field to honor the engineers and designers who contributed to air superiority. There are PhDs from MIT, legendary designers from Lockheed and Boeing, generals with chests full of medals. Frank Walker is invited. He doesn't go. His boss, Luke Hobbs, accepts an award on behalf of the Pratt Whitney ADI team. In his speech, Hobbs tells the story of a test technician who mixed water and methanol in a mason jar and changed the course of the war. But Walker is back in East Hartford, already working on the next generation of radial engines. When a journalist tracks him down for an interview in 1946, Walker is uncomfortable with the attention. The journalist's notes describe him as shy, almost apologetic about his accomplishment. The journalist asks, "Do you realize your invention probably saved thousands of lives?" Walker thinks for a long moment. The pilots saved lives. The bomber crews saved lives. I just mixed 2 liquids that were sitting in the shop. Any chemist could have done it. But they didn't, the journalist points out. You did. Walker shrugs. I read Harry Ricardo's old paper. The science was there since 1932. I just wondered if anybody had tried adding antifreeze. In the decades after the war, Walker's ADI system becomes standard technology, not just in military aviation, but everywhere high-performance engines push against thermal limits. The B-52 Stratofortress uses water injection for takeoff power well into the 1990s. The Boeing 707 commercial airliner uses it for high-altitude operations. Modern turbocharged automotive engines from BMW, Saab, and others employ water methanol injection for performance enhancement. In 2025, as electric vehicles and hydrogen fuel cells dominate headlines, internal combustion engines in racing and aviation still use variations of Walker's cocktail. Snow Performance, Aquamist, and other companies sell ADI systems to enthusiasts worldwide. The principle never changes: evaporative cooling and octane enhancement through a simple mixture. Frank Walker retired from Pratt Whitney in 1968 after 33 years. He held 7 patents, but the ADI system, his most famous invention, he never patented. It needed to be available to everyone immediately, he said in a 1987 interview shortly before his death. You don't patent something during war. The final test report on Walker's ADI system, now preserved in the Smithsonian Archives, ends with a note from Luke Hobbs. This device, developed by a test technician with no formal engineering degree, represents one of the most significant advances in aircraft propulsion of World War II. It exemplifies the principle that innovation often comes not from following established doctrine, but from questioning why doctrine exists in the first place. In the end, Frank Walker's legacy isn't just the thousands of pilots and bomber crews who came home because of his work. It's the reminder that the biggest breakthroughs often come from the simplest questions. The experts said you couldn't get more power from the R-2800 without destroying it. Walker asked, "What if we make it cooler?" The experts said water in an engine was crazy. Walker asked, "Has anyone actually tried it?" Sometimes genius isn't about having the fanciest degree or the biggest laboratory. Sometimes it's about having the courage to mix water and methanol in a mason jar at 2 a.m. And sometimes the most sophisticated solution to an impossible problem is just a bartender's cocktail, 50-50, served ice cold at 26,000 feet. Frank Walker, 1911-1988. Pratt Whitney, Test Engineer 7 patents, 33 years of service. Never gave a public speech about ADI. His cocktail is still used in high-performance engines today. I just read an old paper and wondered if it would work. Any technician could have done it. Frank Walker, 1987.